President Trump could decide any minute now on whether to respond to yet another suspected chemical attack by the Assad regime. So after years of skirting responsibility for these atrocities, what is the right move for President Trump to take now? Here now to weigh in is the former Assistant Vice Chief of Staff to the Air Force, Lieutenant General Richard Newton. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Good morning, Heather. It's good to be back with you.
So what is the next step that should happen?
Well, Heather, as the president mentioned yesterday, still looking at intelligence and looking at various reports to determine the source of these chemical attacks. All are pointed towards the Assad, and the Assad regime carried out these attacks. And I believe the president has been meeting with his national security team, incidentally with all the U.S. combatant commanders who were meeting with the president yesterday on a prearranged session. But I believe he's now huddled with his national security team to determine what those next steps will be. Which could involve supposedly a strike against the Assad regime should it be determined that he is the culprit in this. Everything's pointing towards that.
You look at these pictures that we've been seeing coming in. We have 40 people at this point who were killed, 1,000 people injured, women and children, families suffocated in their homes. It's a scene that's becoming all too familiar there in Syria. We had, the president come out specifically yesterday. He mentioned Putin by name, talking about Russia and Iran. In terms of our relationships with Russia and Iran, how much responsibility do they hold?
Well, they hold because they've been part of supporting the Assad regime. It's much like a multidimensional chess game, from an international standpoint, with Russia and Iran implicated as well along supporting the Assad regime. Let's also step back a little bit. It was a year ago on April 4th, I believe, that when Assad conducted a chemical attack against civilians as well. And then it was 3 days later on the 7th of April that the president authorized a strike of those 59 Tomahawk land attack missiles to go against a Syrian airfield. And so, again, that was a red line that was crossed. The president acted. The U.S. acted. This is another red line, and I believe that the president needs to act forcibly in this case.
Can
all eyes are on Washington, D.C.
I want to ask you about that. Going back to the response from the attack a year ago, we did get a report last night that the USS Donald Cook has left Cyprus and that there are Tomahawk missiles on board, and it would place it within striking distance of Syria.
Well, again, his U.S. senior national security team, led by obviously Secretary Mattis and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dunford, are again providing options for the president to be able to choose from. I wouldn't go into specific details. I don't really have access to the specific details, but there are options, and it could be another sea-based attack or response, rather, that we conducted last year. But the president does have a number of means, and I think he, in my view, if I were advising the president, I would have him act diligently and forcibly. But again, what is that is the reaction, obviously, to this recent attack. But as General Joe Votel, who's the commander of U.S. Central Command, essentially U.S. forces in the Mideast, said last week, making remarks in Washington, D.C., the hard part is really in front of us. It's what's the long-term challenges and implications, and what is it that we do or we help lead in terms of the reconstruction and returning people to the homes, providing food and water, and so forth. That's and if I may, that's also where we make sure that we have all U.S. instruments of national power, diplomatic, economic, financial, and military, on the table to address this situation.
Yeah, we just definitely need it to stop. We all know that. Lieutenant General Richard Newton, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.